Hello, can you hear me?
I can.
Ear snacks.
No, this is Ear Snacks for Parents.
With Andrew and Polly.
Okay, hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm okay. All right, well, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Polly, and you are not listening to Ear Snacks.
No, this is Ear Snacks for Parents.
This is a bloop, bloop. You can tell it's Ear Snacks for Parents because there's very little editing.
No editing.
This is Ear Snacks for Parents. It's a special episode where we are talking just with adults today. So if you found this and you are looking for something to listen to as a family or kids to listen to by yourself, we're going to give you just a second to find something else, something better.
Find something better.
Find something better. Okay, now we're going to stop being so delightful. Okay. You may know us from our podcast.
From podcasts such as Ear Snacks.
Yes, where we're sort of childlike ourselves, because often we're acting as a proxy for your kids who are listening. But we are also just two grown-up people.
It's true, relatively.
Well, sort of.
Yeah.
And we have two kids of our own.
Yep, we have a son who's almost 4 and a daughter who is 9 months.
Yes.
We'd been thinking about doing a Bad Guys episode of Ear Snacks for a long time now.
Right. We started planning the second season of Ear Snacks
last
back
summer,
in the summer.
Yeah.
So we had been planning this episode on Bad Guys for quite some time. And we've been working on it, and we were supposed to air it last week on Valentine's Day in 2018.
Yeah.
We thought it would be just like sort of funny to air like a Bad Guys episode on a day about love. Anyway, it's not funny anymore.
No.
Because there was a school shooting in Florida that seems like one story in a number of stories that are about tragic events that keep coming up maybe more and more frequently than at least we are prepared for.
It seems like almost nonstop this entire past year.
And I don't know if that's because we're paying more attention or because we're feeling more feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Or because it really is happening more often. Anyway, we just couldn't release the episode. We couldn't
release the episode without really explaining to you guys why we want to do it.
Or thinking like super even a little bit harder about how the episode comes out. So we still plan to release it. We hope you'll trust us that we're gonna do it well.
Yeah.
But the struggle that we're having, we figured we might as well just like have it in an open way with you, so you can kind of hear what we're thinking about.
Yeah.
So, you obviously don't have to listen to this if you don't want to know what's going on inside our brains. But we're just going to be really open about it. We're going to get into it, right? We're going to be talking to Jane Lindholm, who is one of the co-hosts of But Why, a podcast for curious kids.
Out of Vermont Public Radio.
That's right. We're going to be talking to her about how to talk to kids about violence in the news. And we're also going to be talking to her about kind of like adult feelings about the news in relation to kids' play. And we wanted to have a brief conversation with each other and available to you before we actually sit down and talk with her. And after we talk to Jane, Andrew and I will be talking about a book that I have been trying to read. It's called Magic Cape's Amazing Powers, Transforming Superhero Play in the Classroom by Eric Hoffman. And while it's focused on superheroes, it's really about heroes and villains and how to set up play that supports kids when they're naturally curious about this stuff. When we were planning our episodes about Ear Snacks for the second season, sometimes we say, like, what would Mr. Rogers do with this? You know, he'd probably talk to somebody that's interested in this. There would probably be some play that's tangential to it. There might be a little bit of fun. There might be a moment of more seriousness. And so we try to do something like that. And if you listen to the show, you probably notice that. But with respect to this episode, Bad Guys, which we naturally thought would be really fun to do, because it's kind of funny when kids are like, I'm bad. Oh, I'm so bad, right? Because they're like, they're so cute, right? And they're not like actually like mean. And it provides all these chances to have teachable learning moments together.
We thought we could go from the funny, exciting parts of it to the actual thinking about what is a bad guy and why do they be bad?
Right. Why do they be bad? But in trying to do this, okay, like this is the first time that I think I felt really like out of my depth in trying to do an episode. I don't know if you felt that way, Andrew.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, we talked a little about natural disasters in cracks.
That was hard. I felt like when I tried, I could do it.
We talked about how to and how not to use your hands in hands.
Right. Well, and the problem with these episodes that we're working on that seem universal to preschool themes is that
they're also connected to real adult hard things.
Yeah. So, when we're working on the episode about hands and we're talking about how to keep your body safe and how no one should touch you if you don't give them permission, like we're talking about the Me Too movement, or when we're talking about things that break and crack, we're talking about earthquakes and natural disasters, which really happen in the world, But as we've encountered each one of them, with no background in developmental psychology, neither of us went to school for this.
Correct.
Neither of us has a degree in working with young children. We have had experiences with thousands of children across the country, and now we are parents ourselves.
And we think about kids' media a lot.
We read everything we can. But this is the first time an occurrence in the news has met up with a podcast theme of ours that I have felt just like unable to handle alone.
And without context. We didn't want bad guys to show up in your feed this February without explaining why we're doing it.
Yeah, so that's why we're making this episode, and that's why we're talking to the guests we're talking to. And we'll be back once we get Jane on the line. Oh, tell us who you are, Jane. We want to know everything about you.
Good. How long do you have? My name is Jane Lindholm, and I am the host and co-producer of But Why, a podcast for curious kids out of Vermont Public Radio. And I also host a daily news show for VPR in Vermont that's a news and public affairs and current events and arts and culture show called Vermont Edition. And in addition to that, I am the mom of a 4-year-old son and a 1.5-year-old daughter. And so I think about kids and kids programming and the news all the time.
Nice.
And you're part of Kids Listen, our little podcast grassroots organization.
Yeah, our wonderful grassroots podcast organization.
Well, thank you for taking a little time out of your busy news producing day to talk to us about kids and bad guys and media and what do we do? How do we do this?
Yeah. The episode that we have planned is about kids pretending bad guys.
Which we know is part of how kids grow up.
Right.
That's usually a type of play that happens.
Right.
Right.
Our sons are similar ages. We have a almost 4-year-old. So this may have come up in your personal life as well.
Yeah, it certainly has. We've got a lot of imaginative play happening in our house and on the playground lately.
And it takes so many different forms.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting to see when it's fun for him and when it sort of turns into something that feels a little bit more threatening and scary to him, and when we start to have conversations about bad guys. It's been very interesting to watch that.
Yeah. We're just getting into it. I think like it first cropped up maybe around 2.5. There was like a kid at a camp that was like something about bad guys, and we're very sheltering with our media, what's allowed.
Yeah, he hasn't seen very many movies.
Yeah, so it's like, where is this coming from? What's happening? And I think one of the first reactions that parents have, especially if you're very restrictive or curating your kids' exposure to media, you're like, where did they get this?
Yeah, I mean, especially around guns at our house. We are a hunting household, but guns are not something we expose our children to at all. And so when my son started playing with sticks and calling them guns, it was really disturbing for us at first because my husband and I thought, we were trying to protect him from this. This is not, where is this coming from and how is this happening? And you do sort of have to let some of that go a little bit because it does happen organically. Kids figure things out. There are kids that he's friends with who have older siblings who bring things to the table. And so then it actually gave us an opportunity to talk about our values, to talk about, why he's not allowed to have a gun, why we don't have really even squirt guns, and, what guns are. And so now he'll say to us, yeah, I know, guns are tools, or guns are not toys. So you, in some ways, have an opportunity to bring some education into it perhaps a little bit sooner than you anticipated. But, I have found that those conversations have been fairly fruitful, even with a very young kid.
That's a great way of saying something that we've experienced too, which is like when that stuff comes up, whether it's a friend with an older sibling or somebody who has a less restrictive media diet, there's really nothing you can do about this stuff coming into your kids' like bandwidth or what they're thinking about.
I mean, it's like any exciting, interesting new thing, right? It's an object that has some kind of power and is dynamic in some way, and a lot of kids are drawn to that idea, right?
Yeah,
and how can I use this in my play? How can I pretend that I have it, or how do I, any of those things?
The first thought I definitely had was like, where did he get this? Who did what? What kid? But
right, and how can I clamp down on this right now so it stops happening?
Right, but then the thing that I naturally came to very quickly is what you said, which is that like, no, this is a chance for us to talk about it, and my kid is showing me that they're ready to consider this, and it's time for us to do it. Not like I could have prevented this conversation.
And I don't think I ever had that conversation growing up, but I grew up in a liberal urban area in San Francisco, and I didn't know anyone who had guns, and I played guns all the time with my brother, and I did not grow up into an adult who is interested in using or having or needing guns or attracted to them. So I know from personal experience that you can be a kid who plays with those things, but yet I'm still scared as a parent that, am I guiding his understanding of violence or what he is playing at, and the difference between what's real and what's pretend.
Yeah, and I think also for young kids, there's a lot of sword play, and I'm not panicked that he's going to grow up and start having swords, So, so I think there is some perspective that we need to have, but while also still being realistic. Guns are dangerous, and guns are, awash in our culture. And so, how do we have conversations that are instilling those values and set some parameters around play? This is what's appropriate, and this is what's not appropriate, and this is not going to fly in our household, and that's all fine. But there's sometimes, I think, is this panic about things that are suddenly in our kids' vocabulary and in their view that we didn't put there, that we just don't quite know how to deal with.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a second. I know this isn't something that you've explicitly covered on your podcast, but what do we do? And I know you're not an expert in the field either, but what do we do when we have an adult feeling about something kids are doing that does not accompany that adult feeling? So, for example, if my son calls them pewers, right? Because I don't even know that. And he knows the word gun because at Christmas I said, oh, what would be a great gift for your little sister to get you for Christmas and Hanukkah time? And he was like, I know something. A gun. And I was like, oh man, aside from that, I'm not even sure that he knows what a gun does. And that now there's this idea about these pewers, which he knows how to, do with his fingers.
He knows lasers.
He knows how to do with, he knows how to make them out of blocks, like anything.
His Legos, the new Legos that he's super into have
we made
laser things. Yeah.
We made a camera out of a Lego kit, and he thinks it's a gun, which Susan Sontag could just have gone wild with that, which was amazing. But, when I see him doing that, I have to stop for a minute because I see a gun and I say, a gun is a real thing. A gun can be a dangerous thing. Very bad things can happen because of guns. And as
they have recently.
Right. And yet in the play world, it's like a whole different place. I don't know.
Yeah. As you said, I'm no expert on this. And certainly as a parent, I think I always feel like, I don't know if I'm doing this right at all. But I think about the ways that I've talked to the experts about how to deal with children who are bringing things up. And part of it is for me to try to be very open with my children. And as I said, my daughter's a year and a half. She's still figuring out words. So we're not at that level with her. But with my son, to make sure that he doesn't feel like any of it is closed off. So I want to make sure that he can come to me with questions. And he does have questions more and more because some of the things that he learns about confuse him. Or we're a big public radio family. I work in public radio, and the radio's on in the morning. And lately, the news has been very disturbing, and he's old enough to hear some of that and take some of that in. And so I try to make sure that he knows that I'm always open to a conversation rather than just shutting down things that are going on in his play because they make me uncomfortable. And so I think he's probably, as he grows up, going to be as annoyed with me as I was with my parents, that everything had to be a discussion, that we always talked about everything. And I can remember saying to my father at one point, why don't you just ground me? Just tell me no. It was more annoying to have to talk about it than it would have been to just be punished for something.
Right. Yeah. Well, you just touched on something that But Why has an episode about how to talk to children about violence in the news. And I just want to bring up something that you covered in that episode. You interviewed Robin Gurwitch. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you talked about kind of the shift in awareness of children and kind of when that happens, which is something that the parents of our listeners might be curious about. You all talked about was that kind of kids like under the age of 3, you can kind of shelter them in a way from most media. But as they get to be over 3, and I've noticed it already with our son who's almost 4, they start to kind of be aware of what's going on, whether it's at the grocery store checkout line or
discussions grown-ups are having around them.
Actually, we had a funny thing happen at dinner the other night. We were out at a restaurant, and there's a TV, and there's TVs in restaurants often that I just completely ignore. But I saw my son was just watching and watching and watching, and I finally said to him, there's lots of TV that's made for kids, and you get to watch some of those shows. But if you ever see something that's made for grown-ups that you don't understand, you should know you can always ask me about what you've seen. And so then it was just like nonstop questioning. He's like, what's that? What's that? What's that? I was like, found myself explaining golf, which like, why?
Except golf. We can't talk about golf in this family.
No, I'm sorry.
But anyway, and then Dr. Gurwitch brings up that, once they can read, which like 5, 6, 7, you're
cat's out the bag.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do. I mean, they can read any headline or subtitle on a silent television anywhere that they've driven by, or something that's over your shoulder on your phone, or just anything.
But it would be cool to talk to you, Jane, about how doing research for that But Why episode kind of informed your thinking about parenting and about your own kids' exposure to violence and violence in the media.
Well, unfortunately, it really has been hit home recently since the shooting in Parkland, Florida, because, as I said, we were listening to my station that I work for, our local public radio station, in the morning before school, and my son was sitting there listening. And it's one of the realities of modern-day schooling. At his preschool, they recently had a lockdown drill. And the school told us about it, and then he told me about it, and he told me what they did, and all the teachers had us go into the bathroom, and we had to stay in the bathroom, and we had to stay quiet, and then Miss Andrea, who runs the school, came around and checked on all of us, and we weren't being quiet enough, and so we had some conversations about that, and that's another moment
it's just like
where
a big giant yikes, by the way. For
my
me.
Goodness, no kidding. I mean, as a parent, what I wanted to do was cry because it's so hard that that's the reality for our children. But then I also felt very glad that the school is taking these precautions because this is the world we live in. And then we could have a conversation about what a lockdown drill was, but without some of the really hard realities. I think he knows about bad guys. So he said, so it's if a bad guy comes. And we sort of left it at that. And then listening to the radio after Parkland, they mentioned lockdown drills. And so his ears perked up because he knows that word. And he connected it to what he was hearing. And it was a very hard and sad conversation for me to have with him because he said, Mom, did that bad guy shoot someone? And I had to say, yes, he did. And he said, did he shoot 2 people? And it was this very 4-year-old conversation where the numbers, he's counting and working on the numbers.
Count now.
And I just thought, we're here. We're at this moment where I can't protect him from everything. But I also remembered what Dr. Gurwitch had told us in that episode was that for younger kids, you can still limit their media consumption. So we turned the radio off, and we haven't turned it on in the morning. Not because I think I can shield him from everything, but he doesn't need to hear some of the things that are happening. And we talked about, I said this, that a young man killed 17 people. And, I tried not to belabor the details, but also not to lie to him and not to tell him, oh, we don't have to talk about that, because he heard it. It's a reality. And so I wanted to make sure that I modeled, this is something that is disturbing, but we can talk about it, but we're not going to talk about it too much. And if you have questions, we can talk about it again. And he brings it up every now and then. And it's, it's very hard for me, but also I think important to be honest with him to a point. Honest, but not all the details.
Yeah, there was something else Dr. Gurwitch said, which is that, like, sometimes the hardest thing for parents is starting that conversation because you don't know what to say, and you don't, so when it comes up, there's this fear that happens. And I've experienced this too in talking to our son. But then almost immediately you start to feel better, even just as the conversation's happening, because a great amount of their fear lies within the unknown. Like anywhere there is space, they could fill it up with fear. And where there's not space for that fear, it won't exist. So in providing information to your son, you're not letting there be a monster under the bed, because under the bed is not available for that.
Yeah, I think that's true, although it's been harder than I thought it might be, because he'll ask me, for example, he said, I don't want to go to school because I don't want to have, I can't remember exactly the phrasing, but what he was basically saying was, I'm afraid I'm going to die. I'm afraid there will be a bad guy. I don't want to go to school.
Yeah.
And, I couldn't say, don't worry, that will never happen to you.
Yeah.
And I did say reassuring things, but I couldn't. And we've talked in the podcast as well, in an episode for children, a lot about death. And one of the things that the experts that we've talked to about death say is, don't lie. Don't say somebody's gone to sleep. Don't say they'll come back. Don't say they've gone away. Because as you said, it allows room for fear, or kids think if they get sick, then they're going to die. But that means that it's really hard not to be able to say to him, don't worry, you're not going to die. Or don't, he'll say, when am I going to die? And I can't say, you're never going to die, because that's not true. And that for me has been really difficult to navigate.
Yeah, there was a part of the episode, the But Why episode, about talking to kids about violence in the news that I was listening to, and I just stopped and I paused it because I didn't know what to do with myself. But Dr. Gurwitch says you can say to your child, I'm doing the best I can. Yep. I'm doing everything I can to keep you safe and to keep our family safe. And as an adult, when you're like, it's not enough, there's a huge amount of the world that I can't keep you safe from. It was so arresting for me, and I really didn't know what to do with myself. I wanted to call Dr. Gurwitch and be like, wait a second, but what about now,
Yeah.
Well, and that brings us to making media for kids that touches on these topics. But the commonality between But Why and Ear Snacks is, they are about kids' interest in the real world. And
we're kind of approaching things from the sides, but you guys are really addressing them head on. To do an episode that is about death for kids it's I don't know, it's big.
Yeah, and not without some fear on our parts. You don't want to introduce kids to things that are going to scare them, or especially I think we worried more about how parents would react, because the questions we got from children about death were profound, but also just honest and curious. Why do we have to die? What happens when you die? What does it feel like to die? The kids actually want to hear answers to that. And what they don't want to hear is an adult saying, we don't talk about that, or don't worry about it, because they're already thinking about it. So they want the adults in their lives to tell them, to give them some answers and to certainly be reassuring, but not to paint over the truth. They want to hear the truth. And so that was interesting for us to try to make sure that we were balancing that desire to know the truth with an acknowledgement that young kids, especially, a 4-year-old listening to this is going to be very different than a 9-year-old listening to this. And in some ways, maybe the 9-year-old would have more fear. And so trying to navigate that was tricky, but also felt like to us our responsibility in being podcasters who are trying to speak honestly and openly to kids.
It's an admirable, very brave thing to do, and there's no playbook for it.
No, there's not. Well, except that there are really smart people who do this for a living, and
That's right.
I feel lucky that I don't have to be the expert. I have to call somebody else up, and so the Center for Grieving Children can say, well, this is what we've learned. This is what works for children, and so then they talk directly to the kids about what we know about death, and then how to be good friends to other children who might be grieving, and what grief can look like and how different it can be. And I thought that was a really powerful part of the episode for me, was that grief can look very different for all kinds of people. And the idea that kids can still be good friends to people who are experiencing loss was a really powerful part of that episode in giving kids some action that they can take to feel empowered.
Oh, yeah. And another action that I think is worth talking about here that you guys mentioned in the episode would be like ways kids can help anything. Just because the very act of helping makes us as humans, and especially kids, feel better, even if it's not changing the scenario or the situation. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some ideas for helping.
When in my other work as a news host, I've talked to researchers who have worked in trauma zones and in after earthquakes and natural disasters and other kinds of traumatic events. And they have said that kids, teenagers and kids, really do feel empowered if they can do something to help, whether it's to help their own situation or to help others. And so some of it might be actually letting kids help in the cleanup process if something has happened to your home, or if your children are disturbed by events in the news, maybe they could send a card to the students at another school where a terrible thing has happened. And so that it lets them feel the empathy, but also feel like they're taking some action and taking some action with their peers to be helpful. So if it's volunteering, if it's in your own community, to be able to do that. Or Dr. Gurwitch recommended it could be as simple as sending a note to the first responders who just responded to something far away, or to the first responders in your community. Maybe go to the fire station with a box of clementines to say thank you for being here for our community, so that it gives kids a chance to feel empowered and maybe to ask the kids themselves, your children, what they would like to do so that they can feel like they're taking this action with you.
Yeah. Help the helpers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I always liked what Mr. Rogers said is, in emergencies, like, look for the people who are helping. There are always people trying to make it better. And I think kids usually start off, their costume and role-playing play, thinking about those kind of powerful and bright costumes, like being a firefighter or a police officer. And then maybe their play gets more nuanced and they start being interested in being the bad guys. But what we've found through interviews that parents have conducted with their kids for this upcoming episode of Ear Snacks is that, some kids think it's fun to play bad guys, but then usually they are also interested in being the superheroes or in figuring out how to stop bad guys. And we even had one kid whose mom is a psychologist talk about how, what would be the most amazing superpower to stop bad guys? What if you could touch their hearts and make them feel the feelings of other people's, then they wouldn't be bad guys anymore. And that's what a lot of kids have also concluded, that if bad guys thought about other people's feelings, maybe they wouldn't be bad guys anymore.
I'm so interested to hear it because it just sounds fascinating. But that's also, we do a lot of conversations in our household too about why are bad guys bad? And we've had questions lately about, are bad guys always bad? Or are they sometimes good? Are they partly good? Can good people be bad? And these very nuanced ideas about what makes somebody a bad guy and what do they do and how do you not be a bad guy? And then listening to him talk about his play and which friends maybe scare him when they're bad guys. And so I think there is some of that coming in even at age 4 of trying to figure out the world through this creative play with his friends.
Yeah, that's like the crux of the whole thing is playing this stuff out in their classroom or at home, on the playground, places where they feel safe, where they feel comfortable, figuring out these things on such a large level. Bad guys who can do big bad things and superheroes who can do superhuman things allows them to kind of sort out the world and figure out how they can be towards each other in a kind of a big way that's big enough to understand. And we want to talk more about that. So we're planning the next part of the episode to kind of delve into how this kind of play crops up in the classroom and what's normal and, how to set limits for safe play. Like you said, some kids, when they are bad guys in play, scare your son. Mm-hmm. So we're going to go into that part of the conversation, but we're going to say thank you so much for being willing to talk about this.
Oh, thank you for having me. And it's really wonderful to be able to talk to a community of other creators and parents who are all grappling with these things, because I think the more we can all talk about it together, the easier it is to navigate some of the really tricky parts of being parents and being people who care about the young people in this world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll even make progress so our society is not this way forever.
Let's hope.
Yeah. So the other thing that I wanted to bring up is what we were talking about with Jane, how 3-year-olds have a totally different sense of what's going on in the world than 7-year-olds. And actually, anecdotally, it was actually really interesting that we saw some of that play out in the interviews that we did with the kids for the Bad Guys episode. What's your name?
Gray.
Gray. How old are you?
8.
What do you know about bad guys?
So many things.
Like what? Tell me one.
But what kind of bad guys? Robbers?
I don't know. What kind of bad guys can we think of?
Bullies, robbers, like people that do a lot of racism.
That's true. Yeah.
Who don't respect black people and respect more white people.
So one kind of bad guy is somebody who doesn't respect other people's differences. That's a real kind of bad guy.
Like major bad.
Major bad. Maybe the worst. I don't know.
One of them worst.
Is there another name for bad guys?
I don't know. Rude guys?
Rude guys.
Mean guys? Horrible guys? Miserable guys? Most unrespected guys? I don't know.
So young children under 4, when their parents asked, what's a bad guy? Or can you think of any bad guys? The kids would answer kind of abstractly, like someone who takes something from someone else, someone who doesn't follow the rules. If the kids know any superhero mythology, then they would say one of the bad guys they could think of. A few of the kids were hip to that. But we had a couple interviews with 7-year-olds, and those played out very differently. And I don't know if that stuff is going to make it into the episode in a particular way, because when we asked what's a bad guy, those kids gave us real-life examples of bad guys. And it's not that I wasn't surprised that they know about what's going on in the world, but they talked about white supremacy. They talked about racism. And it definitely didn't have the same innocence that the young kids' answers had. So when kids start to be aware of real-life bad guys, perhaps the rules and limits for their play also change. So what's okay in a 3-year-old is different than what's okay in a 7-year-old. And I'm sure that sounds obvious now that I'm saying it out loud. But it wasn't so obvious to me in this kind of really subtle way. All right, we're back.
That was so nice of Jane. Oh.
Yes, we have a new guest on the show now.
A new guest.
We had really hoped to interview Teacher Tom. I don't know if any of you are familiar with his work. But Teacher Tom wasn't available, so instead, we're going to try to have this conversation ourselves. But our babysitter had to leave, so our 9-month-old's going to hang out with us and be distracting.
Yep. In absence of Teacher Tom, we are going to talk about this book that you mentioned.
Yes. So I think I got this actually from Teacher Tom has a couple of articles on Gunplay in the classroom. He used to teach a younger group, and he moved up to teach an older set of kids. And when he did, he was surprised at the new and different kinds of limits they had to set in their classroom because some kids wanted to play bad guys, and some kids wanted to be able to pew at each other.
Pew pew.
And they, one of the things they do in their classroom is they set the rules for their classroom. So when something new comes up, then they need to talk about it in their meeting and amend their rules and work with each other to make sure everybody's feeling safe.
This is something I've noticed that really good classrooms usually do. Like the kids are involved in the process of rule making and how we make a fair, system for ourselves.
Right.
And I know that some families do that too, and we do not do that very often.
Well, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. So I think like one of the things we talked about with Jane Lindholm was that children who are under 3 don't necessarily notice what's going on in the broader world, but children that are 3+, or as you can see, there's like a huge developmental shift that happens once a child is 4. So they start to be able to understand like things a little bit more complicated. And part of that is because their understanding of time changes. Once they can understand that there's a past and there's a future, so at some point, kids can think about what the rules might be because they can think about how they might feel about something later, as opposed to how they feel about it right now. So first of all, the book we're talking about is called Magic, Capes, Amazing Powers, Transforming Superhero Play in the Classroom by Eric Hoffman.
Yes.
And I had to order a used copy, and it's wonderful. I have not read the whole thing. I would like to read the whole thing. I hope I can read the whole thing. And it is written really for teachers, but I think it's really wonderful for parents and supporting.
Say you're a parent that doesn't have any time to read anything but has time to listen to this. What could you take away from this book?
All right, so say you are that parent.
Yes.
Okay, so a couple things that are interesting. Okay, I'm going to read a passage from the book.
Do.
Along with a desire to explore their feelings, preschoolers are ready to tackle some major intellectual and spiritual questions. As Janine, age 4, puts it, sometimes I have little questions, and sometimes I have a big fat question. Their newly developed mental abilities allow them to think about these important issues. What is right and wrong, good and bad? What is fair and what is unfair? What is life and what is death? What is a boy and what is a girl? What is real and what is fantasy? More than any other play, superhero play touches on all these big questions. Play is not only the way children express feelings, it is also the method that children use to test their theories about how the world works. So, like we were saying when we were talking to Jane, if you see kids pewing each other, it feels so uncomfortable as an adult. And in fact, one of the rules that Teacher Tom sets up in his classroom is no pewing at each other. And later they have to amend that rule, which is no pewing at people who don't want to be part of the game. So, but as an adult, watching kids play in this way can be so uncomfortable because we hear in the news and some people see the real effects that guns have. Kids are trying to figure that out too. Whether they're trying to process the news or they're trying to what are you still my friend if I call you a name?
Well, I was going to say that's, like they use the biggest possible, word or symbol that they have at their disposal. And I'm not dissuaded by my son using strong symbols as he's trying to find more nuanced ways to say things.
Right. Well, because the point is 6 months ago, maybe he would have done something like scream and kind of flail his arms when he's tired. And now he can say, no joke, he can say, I'm super tired. Can we go to bed now? Right? I mean, in the same way that you
super
can
tired.
say...
Maybe that's my superpower.
Yeah.
Super tired.
In the same way you can say about a friend, like, I don't like the way you're playing, but will you still be my friend?
Yeah.
You could get someone in the game of bad guys and then change teams, as it were. And that's the other thing about this play that seems interesting is, like, it's very fluid with them.
Yeah.
They can be bad guys and good guys. They can switch
You
back
be
and
the bad
forth.
guy now. I'll be, yeah.
Yeah, they can. And this is also the kind of play that can't happen until they're ready to be willing to try something like that.
Yeah.
Because
and it kind of precedes like rules like a game like tag or something like that where somebody's it and then somebody else is it.
well, this is part of figuring out how to make up a game together
Yeah.
that is fair that people want to play.
Yeah.
The other thing that they say in the book is, like, this is not to condone physical violence in play or physical violence in a classroom. I mean, you have to take a lot of steps to ensure that people are able to play this game safely and willingly.
Didn't you say Teacher Tom had a way of playing bad guys where he just says like, "Ha, I'm a bad guy."
Yeah, Teacher Tom does have a way of doing that. So I guess he never wanted to be the bad guy. Let me pull that up on his blog.
Yeah.
So we can. So any of you who are interested, I really encourage you to check out Teacher Tom's writing. His name is Tom Hobson, and he has a book that's called Teacher Tom's First Book, Teaching and Learning from Preschooler. And he is a teacher at the Woodland Park Cooperative Preschool. So Teacher Tom has a post on his blog that's called No Bad Guys, which I thought was pretty neat. So these kids started playing bad guy during Pretend. And he says this is usually like kids making, I'm going to quote, fierce faces, posing threateningly, attempting to capture one another, although it sometimes takes the form of attempting to dam up a river that others are creating in the sand pit. So they readdressed the rules in their classroom, and some of the kids tried to make a rule that said no bad guys. So when that happened, Tom asked, I turned to the bad guys asking, why do you like playing bad guys? Each of them took a turn making their case, citing fun as their main support, though several made the point that it was just pretend. And so then Teacher Tom said, well, we can't make that other rule about no bad guys because everyone doesn't agree. But some people are afraid and some people think it's fun. So what can we do? But they really didn't get anywhere. So he finally says, it looks like we're not going to be able to make a new rule. Some people still want to play bad guys and some people still want them to stop. And so one of the kids in the class said, and some people don't care. He said, but I will remind everyone that we have an important rule that we sometimes forget, which is that we don't do anything to anybody before we ask them. So then he turned to the bad guys and he says, that means you have to ask people before being bad guys to them. And then he reminds the kids that wanted the bad guys game to stop. And I want you to remember it's just pretend and you can always tell the bad guys to stop. And so then they all agreed that was the plan. He has another post where he talks about becoming a bad guy himself, where he just he gets on this ship and he just is like, I'm a bad guy. I'm so bad. I'm so bad. And that's the extent of pretending bad guys for him. So, okay, so we need to wrap it up.
In conclusion.
Well, how and why do kids play pretend violence when it's not actual violence? The thing that we're uncomfortable with is actual violence.
Yeah.
Right? But what they're doing is pretend violence. The point of this play is for them to basically develop empathy.
Yeah.
What you're so worried about is that they're doing bad stuff.
Yeah.
But what they're actually doing is figuring out.
Yeah. How does bad stuff affect other people?
Yeah. When I do something, what happens? When someone else does something to me, how does that make me feel?
Right.
Then what do we do? Yeah. How do we deal with each other?
Yeah.
So working through that.
What are the limits of fun?
Yeah. Working through that is the entire point of early childhood. Okay, there was one other thing that I wanted to bring up, which is there's a chapter called Understanding Adult Views on Superhero Play. There's a section that says, when a child picks up a stick and shouts bang bang, those anxieties can turn to panic. All our nightmares seem to be coming true before our eyes. We want to know where our innocent babies learn to act like that. And that first place many people blame on is TV. But if we look at the specific issues adults are concerned about, we have to look at how television, movies, and other media fit into the picture. Superheroes in the media and bad guys in the media, there's a violence that is sanitized. If somebody gets punched and stands back up, that is the opposite of what they are working through in school or on the playground, right? Like if you punch me and I cry and then we have to go together to go get an ice pack, then we are learning from each other what it means that you hurt me.
Right.
Versus
seeing a super character
but it's
just get right up. I wish I could get right up.
Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes kids can do some physical things that like you wouldn't expect them to do. They seem like cartoon characters.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's Eric Hoffman talks about how your body feels when you watch media like this. Yeah. Because it's fast action. Yeah. It's fast editing. There's special effects. There's trick photography, he says. And he says, watch this stuff and notice how your body feels. Yeah. Because some say during chase and battle scenes, they feel bombarded by sounds and images that send their heart rate soaring. Others say they get numb or hypnotized and find it hard to look away from the screen. Certain images like guns or people in danger tighten their stomachs, necks, and chest. Some enjoy these feelings and some find them distressing or disorienting. Yeah. This is not an accident, he writes. Fast action video sequences, as well as many commercials, are edited to take advantage of a human biological quirk. Feelings are faster than thoughts. Powerful emotions such as anger, fear, and desire spread quickly through our bodies and limit our ability to think clearly. Our senses go on high alert, and our bodies get ready to run or fight. This idea, feelings are faster than thoughts, is exactly what children are working through, right? Whether they're setting rules with each other or in your home, they're trying to or they're playing with each other, or they're struggling with you because they aren't ready to take their bath. They're learning to use words to explain how they feel, which takes longer than your body does to feel the feeling. So when they do something that's troubling or bad, it's because they feel the feeling and they don't stop their bodies from acting out the feeling. Yeah.
And that's the underpinning of a lot of actual like psychology of music and music to film, which is what we do for a living. When you play an emotion that precedes the audience's actual understanding. If you hear a loud sound, you don't actually process it as a sound before you process it as a danger signal, and your body reacts to it, and you turn your head towards it, and you shift your body away from it. But I think that's This is a really long roundabout way of saying that maybe it's taken us a long time to think about how we can process our feelings on this issue and turn it into media for your children. It's a big task, and we don't take it lightly. And thank you for listening to us try and work our way through these powerful feelings that we have about what happened in Florida and what continues to happen in our country, and our children's growing awareness of it, and your children's growing awareness of it, and how we feel a responsibility to not take that lightly.
Yes, and if any of you have any thoughts on this, any stories to share, we'd love to hear them. Also, you can get in touch with us on the website. You can find us on social media. There's lots of places that we can have a conversation together so we can better understand where kids are and how to support them today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to Jane Lindholm from But Why, a podcast for curious kids from Vermont Public Radio. It's a great podcast, especially for those of you with an older child. We'll make sure you all have a link to the episode about talking to kids about violence in the media. If you want to find some more information about But Why, you can visit butwhykids.org.